It's such a hornet's nest when you go to Bristol, and I think that this race is it's a huge magnitude for a driver to win it. I think they covet this race, just like they would any other crown jewel, like the Southern 500 or the Coca-Cola 600. I think this Bristol night race means a lot to the drivers, and so I think you're going to get everyone's best shot. Do you think we see a non-playoff driver win this race? I mean, Chase Elliott's pretty decent here. We've seen, other cars run well here. Erik Jones is pretty good at this track as well. He's been finishing very well here in the playoffs so far with a top 10 in both of these races. Do you think that they could continue to move forward with a non-playoff driver winning this race?
I think it's possible, but unlikely. I could see, again, Ty Gibbs. He's going to be the one I mention first on non-playoff drivers getting in as of right now because he's been very solid all year round and he has the car to do it. Erik Jones has been running really well for the past couple weeks. He could have a good race, but I think a non-playoff driver going out to a cutoff race and winning it is very unlikely because the guys who are outside of the playoffs and just in, they're bringing their best stuff to this race. And I think that this race on Saturday night, it's going to be a really competitive race between the playoff drivers. And if I'm an outside driver, a guy who's not in the playoffs, you don't really want to get involved in anything that has to do with a playoff guy. So you don't really want to race hard with a guy who's around the cut line and get into a situation where you possibly wreck them or you get into a battle that ends up damaging either of your cars and knocks you out of the race and the driver in the playoffs. So I think it's possible, and I think drivers will be aggressive, but there's going to be a lot of drivers around the cutoff line and just over it that are going to be bringing their best stuff and racing really hard, and they're not going to want to get into anything with a non-playoff guy.
I don't know. I kind of want to disagree a little bit, not to be the devil's advocate, but we saw at the end of this Kansas race on this overtime restart, who were the front two cars? It was Erik Jones and Daniel Suarez. I mean, they're still going out there trying to win races for their sponsors, for their team, and just because they're no longer running for a championship, you can still go trophy hunting. I mean, that's Colleague's whole kind of mantra. They go trophy hunting. They're looking for the trophies. So for me, I think that there are a few drivers that I like that are not in the playoffs that could be potentially really good here. I mean, Daniel Suarez ran really well here on the dirt in the past. I think that this track with the level of aggression that it has favors his driving style a lot. I think Chase Elliott might be really good this upcoming Saturday. And I know that I've been very overcritical of him this year, but he's been out of the car 7 different times. So I don't think he really got into a rhythm, and I think we've seen him kind of come back to life the past couple of weeks.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think guys we see in the Owners' Championship race, they'll be aggressive. We kind of saw that this Sunday with Kansas, with Chase Elliott and Kyle Larson kind of getting in together. But I think at Bristol on the night race, the guys who are in the playoffs and the guys who have a good team behind them, Alex Bowman, Chase Elliott, I think they're going to be pretty fast when it comes to them compared to guys like Erik Jones and Carson Hocevar, who's running a legacy car, and the colleague guys. I think that this track for Erik Jones, we've seen it the past 2 weeks at Darlington and Kansas. He's run really well. He's been in the top 10, ran in the top 3 at Kansas. I just don't think he'll have the speed to compete with guys like Chase Elliott, Kyle Larson, William Byron. I think it's possible, but we've only seen one race on Bristol on the concrete with the next gen car. And that race was a domination race. Both RFK cars, Keselowski at the start of the race and Chris Buescher, nobody can compete with them. And I don't know what Goodyear's bringing tire-wise to Bristol, because that was probably the biggest talk last year, is it was really hard to pass. And the tires were a lot of right rear tire problems. I think we don't have a lot to base this race off of. And if I'm basing it off of the one Bristol race we had, which, yes, a non-playoff driver won the race. That guy's in the playoffs now.
And we had
Mhm.
a plethora of other
Yeah.
non-playoff drivers win in succession. I mean,
Yeah.
Erik Jones won at Darlington, Bubba Wallace won at Kansas, and then Chris Buescher won
Mhm.
at Bristol. So last year was a little
Yeah.
bit of an anomaly.
I think that the guys who are in the playoffs are going to be a step ahead of most people outside of the playoffs. I could see Chase Elliott. I could see Alex Bowman. I could see Ty Gibbs. I could see some colleague guys maybe, but I just don't see a guy like Erik Jones doing what he did at Kansas this weekend. I think Bristol's a totally different track when it comes to the teams of like Hendrick, Trackhouse, uh, Joe Gibbs. I think the teams with the money and the teams that are trying to fight their way for some good finishes, I think Bristol kind of separates that with what we've seen with the next gen car.
Now, I know that we've talked a lot about Erik Jones. Are you very surprised in how well he has been running since Legacy Motor Club came out and said they were moving to Toyota for next year? Because, I mean, they're not getting any OEM help at all from
Yeah.
Chevrolet.
A little bit, but Erik Jones is a really, really talented driver. And you got to say that when a guy wins at Darlington multiple times. Uh, I think we saw it last year in the next gen car. He ran okay for most of the season, but there were races where if he was given a car that was fast, a top 10 car, he was going to put that car in the top 5. And that's the kind of driver Erik Jones is. He's a really, really talented driver. Running at a team that's kind of in a weird state right now, transitioning from ownership and manufacturers. So I think Erik Jones, he's a really good driver. Not surprised that he can put a car up in the top 3 and race with some of the best in the sport. I'm just surprised that Legacy has been very, very quiet all year round. And since we started the playoffs, here comes Erik Jones. He's finished in the top 10 twice in a row, running really good races.
Well, I'm sure they have to be happy with a little bit of change and positive
Mhm.
news, but kind of in that same thread, Noah Gragson has been reinstated to run NASCAR sanctioned races. What do you really see for his future, or do you have any predictions for where he might end up, or will he ever be in a Cup car again?
I think he'll go into an Xfinity car next, is my guess, my prediction. I don't see him hopping into a Cup car anytime soon until he goes back in the Xfinity Series or the Truck Series and proves what he did when he was in the 9 car with Junior Motorsports. Um, I could see him going into Colleague, maybe. Colleague's kind of in a dry spot with their drivers in the Xfinity Series right now. I think a guy like Noah Gragson, who we know is a very talented driver in the Xfinity Series, going to a team like Colleague could elevate them and kind of revamp his career. But I think Cup Series level of Noah Gragson, we're not going to see that until he can prove something in the Xfinity Series or Truck Series.
Staying in this same vein as well, how impressed are you by Carson Hocevar?
I'm really impressed with him. I think in when I watch him, he kind of reminds me of Ross Chastain, his driving style. Very
Oh yeah, he's very
aggressive,
aggressive.
and has the talent to run multiple lines like Ross Chastain can do in that dirt style background where you can run the wall, run the middle, wrap the bottom of the racetrack. And where he races at it with Nice Motorsports, his vibe just gives me Ross Chastain. It looks like he's following the same path Ross did, and he has a very, very similar driving style to Ross. I think Xfinity Series, which I'm guessing we see next year at least part time, is his next step. And I think once he gets a full time or part time ride in Xfinity Series, he'll show you what he can do. But yeah, he's run really well in the trucks. Now getting some more rides with Legacy. He ran this weekend at Kansas and ran pretty solid for a car that didn't fire off really well. Ran in the top 20 for a little bit. I think he finished in the top 22. Yeah, finished in 20th. So a guy to come in and he's just kind of feeding on any opportunity he can get, whether it's trucks. Well, he's got a full time ride in the trucks, but whether it's Xfinity Series or Cup level, really talented driver, and I think he has a path in the sport as long as he can prove it. And I think he's done that as of right now in his career.